So for viewers that are just tuning in right now, in case you missed the now, we just finished airing the Leader in Me approach initiative that both Principal Brian Polston and Tiffany Edge, who is a teacher at Wallace Elementary School, have spent the last several months implementing into their school system. It is an initiative designed to help improve student behavior. So I'm going to open it up to all of our viewers right now, and I'm going to let Principal Brian Polston take it away a little bit and just give you some background about the Leader in Me approach. What's up, Brian?
So when I became principal about 2 years ago, I had this question, and I wondered, what would it be like if our school was filled with students who were responsible, who knew how to have a plan in their life, knew how to set priorities to reach that plan, knew how to solve problems and come up with win-win approaches, knew how to listen and then talk, knew how to get along with people, work together, knew how to take care of themselves. What would our school look like if it was filled with those kind of students? And I came across the Leader in Me, which is built by Franklin Covey Institute, Sean Covey, one of the authors of it, and they took the 7 habits and began to show how that can be taught within the school. One of the things I learned is that we had to change our paradigms, how we view things. And there's 5 major paradigms that we're working on shifting to help us with teaching kids. And that is one that sometimes we think only a few people can be leaders. The shift is, no, everyone can be a leader. Some people think that only a few people are gifted. And our view is that, no, every person is a 10 in something. They're good at something. There's potential in them. The third shift is that if you want to improve our school, you have to change the systems first. The shift is that the change starts with you first. It starts with me. The fourth one is that educators are control and direct student learning. The shift is, educators empower students to lead their own learning. And the last is that we focus on academics only. And the shift is, no, we focus on the whole person. So we're working from kindergarten through 8th grade, teaching students these 7 habits so that they can use that. They're developing life skills so that when they're finished with school, not only do they have the academics, but they have life skills that will make them successful and improve their behavior and ability to be successful in life.
And so that is amazing. And I understand that once you found this, you really wanted to start diving right into studying the student behavior. And so what I understand is that you documented over 1,000 interactions on school campus in different areas. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that in just a moment. But as I just said, they were tracking student behavior in a sense of if they saw a push, if they saw, pushing in line or, misconduct on the playground, they would address it, add another paraprofessional in that area to make sure they can oversee that and that it didn't lead to anything further. Now, teachers like Tiffany here, you are tracking that. You're one of those teachers on campus doing that in the midst of everything. So what's that like for you as a teacher?
I think where we're going with that is, so Brian mentioned the paradigm shift. We in our classrooms are implementing the 7 habits. So we know that all schools have problems with behavior and unwanted physical contact and kids touching and pushing when they shouldn't. So what we're trying to teach on our end, yes, we're tracking data and Brian is helping and the pairs are helping with that. But what we're trying to teach is the 7 habits. And so it's our hope that kids will just innately want to be leaders, want to be better, not want to have those behaviors because they're striving for these 7 habits that we're teaching within the classroom. Coming from a paradigm shift, like Brian said, the students are going to understand having a paradigm shift. That's actually what adults or teachers need to have before we can implement the 7 habits. So after we've taught those to the kids, then it's our hope that they take those out onto the playground and into life with them.
And so, have you seen any changes?
I have. That's so one thing that we had talked about is the very first thing I noticed is, so when I was a kid growing up, there were typically 5 classroom rules, and they're usually universal. They're, raise your hand before you speak, raise your hand before you leave your seat, keep your hands and feet to yourself. And then if you break those rules, there's a consequence. And so it was like, if you break the rule one time, you move your pen down one, or you move your pen down, the next time. So I have traditional classroom rules. Kids come into class and they know what those are, but they already know what those are. They already know they need to keep their hands and feet to themselves. So we're trying to teach them how when it comes time to where you want to put your hands on somebody else, when you want to react, we are teaching them habits to help them be proactive instead of being reactive. So the very first thing I noticed is that I have classroom rules, but I don't have to change a behavior grade or, write your name on the board, which we don't do that anymore. But as an example, I don't have to do those things, because if a student breaks a classroom rule, we can just mention what just happened here. Like, you can talk to them after they already are familiar with the habits, and they can mention I should have been more proactive. Habit number 1, I should have been more proactive instead of being reactive. And so it does away with a lot of discipline and consequences, and just makes the students start to think about how they can be better and not do it next time.
And so you pretty much answered some of the questions that Allison Bogart posted underneath our post here, but she also asked, what has been your greatest challenge to implementing the Leader in Me approach, and how are you overcoming that challenge? So you guys can decide who wants to really answer that question. Do you want to answer that question?
Sure. The greatest challenge is that we all want behavior to immediately change. And there's a lot of frustration we all feel when you're dealing with behavior that's pretty disruptive, and you want it to change like that. Is like, if we just do this consequence, they'll change and they'll stop doing that. Behavior is not easy to change. And so implementing the Leader in Me is something that it's a deeper change. It's going to take time, and as they build those skills, because we're teaching this from kindergarten through, and so as students walk through each grade level, that's going to become more part of how they deal with things, learning how to be proactive and not reactive, learning how to listen first before you are wanting to shout out your side of things. And so the hardest thing I would say is not giving into we're just looking for immediate change, and taking the time to make sure that we're developing a deep change within, and not just wanting a surface change and thinking that's going to fix the problem.
And so another thing that I observed when I was on campus was that this was not so much, rules. This was a feeling that everybody had. The students had it. You guys had it. Your superintendent had it. It's a philosophy. So you also created a currency, and it's a small piece that was included in the story, but it's that initiative. One question that I had is, that I think a lot of parents at home watching right now may want to know, is how can parents at home help reinforce what's being taught by you guys on campus? So I don't know which one of you would like to answer that.
I can say a piece of it. One part of the Leader in Me, so it's a 3-year. You go through 3 phases, basically. So the first year, which we just finished, was the implementation. As we go into the second and the third year, we'll be adding more to it, because you can't do it all, at one time. It'll take time, like Brian said. So one thing that we'll be implementing next year is one of the pieces is family. So part of the Leader in Me, we have ways to teach students from the classroom, but we also have access to training families. So we'll be opening it up to having like a family night once a month, to where families can come in. They can be trained. We open that up to the public. I'm not sure that we've had any public sessions yet, but that's something that we're going to be doing. So we'll put it out there. Families can come. They can come as a family, or somebody from the family can come. It doesn't have to be that intense. They don't have to be trained. We have a lot of material. But I think also having conversations with their students. So if they hear their children coming home saying things like be proactive or synergize or sharpen your saw, to stop and take the time and say, like, what does that mean? And to understand it from the child's perspective. And then if they have further questions, obviously it's open door and they're welcome at any time to ask the questions and get more information about it.
Yes. Yeah.
The one example is a teacher was sharing with me that on the way to school, and her son was with her, and she was having a conversation on the on her Bluetooth phone as she was driving, and it was obviously as she's interacting with whoever, she was upset about something and using some, just talking about the situation, and was kind of reacting to the situation. Well, when she finished the conversation, her son, who's been going through learning about 7 Habits, said, "Mom, you were being a little reactive to that." And so it was holding her accountable. It's like, okay, we need to look at this and be more proactive. And those kind of situations have started happening. Even with a kindergarten student, when I was doing presentations out of the community, I had a kindergarten student share the 7 Habits with this group of people. And when she came to the 7th habit, she said, "Sharpen the saw." So one of the gentlemen said, "What is sharpen the saw?" And her response was, "That's when you're tired, you lay down and rest." So she's comprehending, she understands what it means, she understands how it is, and it begins to play over into the home. And so the parents start seeing that, and we're going to be providing in this next year opportunities for parents to learn more exactly those 7 habits, so they can be teaching them at home and embracing them in their home setting, supporting the student, supporting themselves, and our school.
And some of these are all things that we can all really implement ourselves. Listen before you talk. Sharpen the saw, getting that key rest. And it sounds like, as adults, we're being able to monitor our behavior, and when you're doing that on campus and everyone's held accountable, it creates that philosophy. And that was definitely the vibe I certainly got when I was on campus, and that's why I was so thrilled to learn more about it. So is there anything else that you feel that hasn't been touched on so far that maybe parents at home should know? No, you're good.
I feel that we have embraced this whole approach with the Leader in Me. It has started with us first. That we as teachers and and we have with our whole staff in the Kernville Union School District, over 90% of them have gone through the 2-day 7 Habits training, and the drive is it starts with you first. You've got to make them a part of your life. And then you model them and you teach them to the students. And so that piece is very important. And for many of us, like this, as I ended the school year, one of the things I realized, a habit that I have to work on very much going into the summer is that habit 7, sharpen the saw. And so we're encouraging our staff, first focus on yourself. Make sure you're learning, understanding, you're applying the habits, because that's what's going to make you more effective in teaching your students.
Yeah. And so one thing that I had down here was you guys are both in the education system right now, and you have been for a while. So where are you seeing that it's progressing, and where do you see that it needs more support right now in this day in education? What's challenging? Where do you see support? Where do you not see support? That type of thing.
Like all the way across the board, education in general?
Yeah, you guys are immersed in that. Where do you need more support to make sure you can implement things like this?
Well, from families, first of all. But I think on that level, families can only do so much. So I think one of the issues that we ran into as far as support is people that should be implementing it also. One thing I wanted to mention earlier is that when you're in education, we have curriculum that we follow, and we have these guidelines that we follow, and all these things that we need to do, and this testing and these deadlines that we need to meet. And so when you implement something like the Leader in Me, most people look at it like, that's just one more thing that I have to add. And I already have all these things that I have to do, and I don't have enough time to get it accomplished. And so one thing they teach you in the Leader in Me, and it was kind of eye-opening to me back in one of the early trainings, is that the Leader in Me is not one more thing to add to your plate, but the Leader in Me can be the plate. So if you focus on learning the 7 habits and you apply them and you shift your own paradigms within yourself, it just becomes natural. Like you said, when you came onto our campus, you can just feel it, like you can sense it, and that's not something that you can just put on as a show. So that is the people that are involved learning the habits, applying the habits to their own lives, and making those 7 habits the plate that you build everything else on. So I would say understanding that the Leader in Me is not something else just to add, but the Leader in Me is something that can be applied, and it doesn't just have to be applied in schools. The Leader in Me can just be for people, for humans. They're good habits. If we listed all 7 of them, it might, would be easier for people to understand and where they would apply in their lives.
Yep.
When it comes to support, I want to say right up front is that a year ago, when we're wanting to implement this initiative, it's not a program. We realized we had been seeking out a grant that was going to help fund this, and we ended up not getting that grant. We didn't have it within the budget to be able to support it within our own school budget, and so I put it out there to the community, and the support coming from the community was overwhelming. We had the community, businesses, community organizations, churches, individuals on fixed incomes, individuals that have a lot of income, all giving in ways that made it possible for us to begin to implement. So our community in the Kern River Valley has really come behind and supporting us, really moving towards trying to make the change in our culture.
So we do have some questions here. So one of the questions is, what advice would you give to another school interested in implementing this philosophy? Is there any startup cost? So I know the answer to that question. I know that you guys saw this as a very costly endeavor. You were just touching on that. You reached out to the community. You did say that you yourself raised $50,000, but maybe you could talk about how much the entire program cost.
So the comment that I raised the $50,000, I would say I didn't. I put out the vision, and the community rose up and said, we want to do this, and believed in it, and so they supported it. It is an expense, but when I broke it down to what is that actually costing per student, the program. So I figured out that over a 3-year implementation process, it was going to be about $150,000, because you're training all of your staff, and the training costs, the materials that you're using, the resources that you're putting into the hands for the teachers to be able to access on a regular basis through the online membership is what drives that cost. But when you take $150,000 and divide that up per student, and over the course of, this is going to be something that's going to carry us through for years. That cost per student is pretty minimal. It's like, I think it was somewhere around $60 a student for the course of a year. It's like, well, that's not expensive for what you're putting in their hands. So the initial amount did sound expensive, and it does sound like a lot. But when you look at the impact it's going to have on students and how much it costs per student, it's like that really is not that big of a deal. And so people were, I gave them, I said, here's how you can support a student for over the course of a year or over the course of 3 years. Here's how you can support a classroom for the course of a year. It costs about $2,000 for a classroom to get this kind of support. Or this is how you can do it for a classroom over 3 years. And when you break it down like that, it really is a minimal cost for what you're going to get out of it.
And so what does this initiative do in terms of bullying? How does it really eliminate bullying among students? That is another question that a viewer had.
Well, you're teaching kids how to come up with win-win situations. So when they get into a conflict, they're learning how do you come up with solving this problem where it's not I win, you lose. Or you're teaching them that it's, first seek to understand, then to be understood. So we're teaching that. So they're learning how when they're in a situation that they're like, they don't like what that person's doing, or they're wanting to intimidate this. Like, first listen, make sure you understand where they're coming, and then you share your part. So teaching them how to listen, teaching them how to come up, problem solve, teaching them how to synergize, which teaching them how to work together. All those things lend towards stopping the kind of bullying. Bullying a lot of times comes from a sense of insecurity and really not having the skills of how to get along with people.
So have you seen that change? Have you seen bullying decrease at your school?
That's a hard question to answer right off the bat. People have lots of ideas about what bullying is, and will call things bullying that it's just part of mistreatment that's happening. And so, trying to measure that in the time frame that we've been implementing, I wouldn't say I could say that I could show data that says this is how much it's decreased. I believe over this next year, which will be our second year of implementation, we will see that in a greater way, and I would say it will definitely be showing, but I would not be able to say here's the specific way it's happened. I don't know, Tiffany, if you have some specific situations.
Not specific, but just being in the classroom. So I'm not on the playground as much, so I can't speak for out there, but in the classroom, a lot of times bullying doesn't happen in the classroom. Most of the time it happens outside, in the cafeteria, on the playground, on the bus, maybe even. But then when they come into the classroom, you'll hear it, or you'll notice that a couple of the students are off, and then somebody will come and tell you. And so I know, academics is important. We're there to teach children how to read and write and do math. But I will stop whatever we're doing and address it right then. And we can have a conversation about it. And I'm just there to guide, but the students will lead their own conversation. And you'll hear comments like, well, that's bullying, whatever the situation was that happened. And somebody else might mention, like, yeah, they were too reactive. They need to be more proactive. Okay, so can you give me an example of how they could handle the situation better next time? So even if all of the students in the classroom were not, it could have been a fight between two students in another classroom, but to have that conversation with them and bring it to their attention and show them where the things that we're learning, like the 7 habits, where to apply that if they're ever in a situation like that of their own, it gives them more of a conscience. So then when they go back out onto the playground and they might think of taking those actions, it's going to make them think again because they've shifted the way they think about things.
And so I met some of your students who are really starting to implement this. And so one viewer also asked, how is this increasing student achievements? Have you seen any of the students who have really adopted these 7 habits and it's really transformed their demeanor at all, and maybe their achievements have changed? I'm going to let you answer that in just a moment, but I want to talk about one particular student who I noticed. He really wanted to get up and talk when I was in the class. He really wanted to give the interview and talk about the 7 habits, and you can tell that he was bummed out. but I only realized that after I left the class. He came up to you and he said, "Hey, Principal Polston, do you think we can have a chat later?" Principal Polston meets with every student eventually and in the classes that are implementing this, and he really gains that insight. Okay, this is where we're at as far as the negative interactions. Here's what we're seeing, and here's how you can report back to your classroom and hold everyone accountable. So I do want to touch base again on the achievements that you have seen as a teacher from the Leader in Me approach.
Okay. Well, that example right there, we both grinned when you said that, because that is a perfect example of how it's impacting. So the student that you're referring to, I do third grade, so his kindergarten teacher and his first grade teacher and his second grade teacher were like, "Oh, that," and so you better be careful because he'll react to, he might throw something, he might, yell. And so we noticed he was very upset. He is all about the Leader in Me and the 7 Habits, and he's very vocal, and he wanted to be the one to do it, and he just wasn't chosen at that time. So rather than his old habits of screaming or crying or throwing a fit or going out onto the playground and picking on somebody else because he was having a bad day, he chose, you could tell in his demeanor that he was upset, but he chose to sit and think about it and make good choices and apply the 7 habits. And he was a leader, and he took it upon himself to approach the principal and say, "I need to talk to you and I need to spend some time with you." And we had already discussed, like, "Hey, I noticed this is what we're going to do." So then the student came back to me, and I got to have a conversation with, like, "I noticed you were really disappointed, but I also noticed the way you handled it." So he handled it like a leader. Then we did another interview the next week, and we did choose him and it was rewarding, his great behavior, and it was rewarding him applying those 7 habits without even realizing that's what he was doing. He spent a year learning it, and finally, at the end of the year, when it really mattered, he applied it subconsciously. When I pointed out, "Hey, you just applied like all 7 habits at one time," he felt so good about himself. So that is a good example of exactly how what we're doing is making a difference.
And so academically is one thing. We want our kids and our students to be smart. But it sounds like this is really implementing character building, and it is the leaders of tomorrow. That's the way I ended the story. And unless you have anything else to add, I think we have answered all of the questions here. But unless you feel that there's something else I haven't added.
I would like to say something else. Because we're at the very beginning level, so we don't have all the data that shows that there's improvement. The 3 focuses of the Leader in Me is academics, culture, and leadership. Those are the 3 focuses. And so it absolutely impacts the academics. Of other schools that have been implementing it and been doing it for 3 to 4 years or whatever, they can show real clear data of improvement, and we're tracking data. So this year we established a baseline. Next year we'll be able to see, has that improved? How has it improved on their CASP testing scores? How has it improved in their attendance? It's going to show that. We just don't have that yet, but we will see that. So hopefully if we get a chance to come back on here next year, we'll be able to say, here's how it's improved, and we'll have clear data showing that.
Well, I really look forward to following up with this story. Education is such a big piece to the Kern County community. So many people care about it at home. And if you did not get your question answered, make sure you send it to me at tori.cooper@kero.com or leave it in the comments below. I can certainly communicate with both of them and get those answers to you at our greatest convenience. With that, we will end things right now here on 23 ABC. Yeah, that was